Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues. And with this video, I'm discussing my thoughts on episode 6 of the anime series, 3D Kanojo Real Girl. And I feel like there's a lot to unpack with this episode. Going back to the origins of Tsutsui and Ito's having met, seeing how much of a just an asshole Tsutsui was. He'd gotten so used to being bullied and, being by his lonesome, just being an outcast for being an otaku and everything like that. And he had sort of gotten this jagged edge to his personality where even Ito's trying to introduce himself, and you see how sensitive and put upon Ito is with, these other kids trying to copy off his homework and having him do the menial class tasks and everything like that they don't want to do. And he's genuinely trying to introduce himself to Tsutsui, and Tsutsui wants no part of it. He just wants to stay confined to his own little world that he's built for himself, sort of at arm's length from everyone else. And it was off to a rocky start, but much in a similar way to how Iroha, had sort of positioned herself to be someone, backing Tsutsui in the first episode of the series. That's kind of what happened here. This was kind of the precursor version of that, where you have Ito sticking up for Tsutsui and then vice versa in a manner of speaking, and that's kind of what happened with Tsutsui and Iroha much later, as I say, as the series began. And it really made me feel for Ito. This is the first time we've spent a lot of time with him to really get to know him. And, I just sort of taken it for granted. Well, he is Tsutsui's buddy, but, I didn't know whether or not we would ever delve into how that came about, how that relationship was forged or anything like that. And, indelibly in this episode, we get a lot of that information, but it also stands to sort of give you an idea of the mindset of Tsutsui in the here and now, why he has so much trouble getting a bearing on exactly what is going on with Iroha. Why is she so upset with him? What is it about his interactions with her that has her so aggravated and frustrated and such like that? And it really speaks to this level of real world humanity where sometimes other people are very hard to read. And so we sort of, keep ourselves contained within. We recoil rather than going out and seeking interactions with other people, whether plagued by social anxiety or just a level of fear, not necessarily related to anxieties, or even just sort of a pragmatism where it's just like it's so much work and effort to try to make life work around and work about with other people. And I'm used to my own self, the way I conduct myself in the privacy of my own bedroom or my own home, or, and look at how much more extraneous life would be to have to accommodate other people. And that's kind of where Tsutsui is when he first meets Ito, and they matter-of-factly sort of figure out how complementary they are to each other. Now, all of this, of course, is corresponding with, in the here and now, this burgeoning divisiveness between them, because Tsutsui is so consumed with himself and his own concerns, and he kind of selfishly, as an extension of that, he's looking at Ito wanting to go and spend time with a little kitty cat that he sort of rescued on school property. I guess, Ito, he can't bring the cat home. But he's bringing him cat food and everything like that. And Tsutsui, he just sort of blindsidingly puts this all together, forces it all together. Well, I'm so consumed with all this other stuff with it. Why she's upset with me, having a girlfriend to begin with, and all this other stuff. Ido, giving me potatoes at the start of the episode. Just here's a sack of potatoes. And, so he's got all this other stuff going on internally that he kind of becomes oblivious to the fact that, well, my best friend does have a life of his own, no matter how closely knit we are, that we've become since our introduction. it's got to be okay, right? Like he's having this deliberation in his mind. It's got to be okay if he has other friends, right? It's got to be okay if he has a pet cat, an adopted cat, that takes his time away from being at my, beck and call for every last little thing, anytime I need support. And Ito calls him on it. He calls him on his abrasiveness, his jagged edge sort of resurfacing out of just sheer ignorance and obliviousness, because of all the things that he's dealing with. And this is the first episode where I've begun sort of to evolve my thinking about, I've talked time and time again in these videos about certain aspects to the character's motivations that I could not quite wrap my mind around. And I've sort of concluded by this episode that I'm not sure if it's a product of literary genius or story structure genius, or just complete, oafishness on the part of the series producer, director, animators, everything like that. It could go either way. Because I started to realize, oh, wait a minute, look at how awkward Tsutsui is around these other intermingling characters. Look at how, by the end of the episode, he's sort of calm and more drawn to Ayato. He can be more, let his hair down. He's not so be filled with anxiety and uncertainty as he is around Iroha when he's around Ayato, and she ends up observing this. She hears him laughing, and she puts two and two together. That's where he got the potatoes. He made potato dumplings, and he gave some to Ito and gave some to Iroha. Went to her house, and she just sort of sees him standing outside. I love that. She comes to the door. He's like, "Oh, what?" And I saw you standing outside. What do you want? And then their moment of intimacy in her bedroom and everything like that, which was somewhat comical once again. But again, it ended with this awkwardness of Tsutsui running away because there's so much of his life that has been frustrating and has held him back, that he's had to encapsulate, that he's had to, rein himself in and recoil from everyone around him, that the lifestyle he leads, he's not sure if he's deserving of such happiness, such joy, such companionship, someone who hoists him up on a pedestal for who he is and not some facade. He can't really, he's never had that before in his life, anyone ever giving a care or concern for him, let alone actually coming out and saying, I love you, and for who you are. And so naturally it's, what? Recoil. Like, I have to make sense of this. And he's doing calculus in his mind or something. Probably not to get a hard on, in this close a proximity to Iroha, who's wearing, normal clothes, but that he considers to be a little more revealing than perhaps she should be wearing, let alone the fact that it is in the privacy of her own home. And he's like, oh, it's not, the other asshole jerks that, are going to be predators and trying to, sexually objectify her that I have to be worried about. I have to be worried about myself, because I'm sitting here thinking about complex math to not get a hard on, So he goes running. And that very much, again, touches upon the awkward nature of all of this. And when we see Iroha overhearing, he and Ayato just sort of hanging out when he brings the potato dumplings to her, suddenly she realizes something about the way she's been behaving. It's like pushing him away rather than making him open up to her, and she feels so put upon. And we have, of course, Ishino finding Iroha in the hallway and being like, what are you doing in this part of the hallway, or in this part of the school? And she just sort of goes up to Ishino and rests her head frustratedly on, Ishino's chest, just seeking some sort of answer, some sort of, recompense or sanity, something that makes sense, because she really genuinely likes Tsutsui. She really has a love for him. She really appreciates him for who he is. And no matter how much she tries to confide that in him, it's just pushing him further and further away. That's nothing to do with her. It's not a product of her own fault. It's all Tsutsui. Tsutsui is completely awkward. And there's so much of his character that's just he can't make sense of kindness. He can't make sense of compassion being thrown toward him. He spent so much of his life being outcast, being, the butt of jokes, having names being called to him. At least he's not being called like, a child predator anymore, at least as of this episode. I mean, I'm sure there are still characters who hold that opinion. Hey, the otaku lolicon back in, the back of the class. At least we didn't see any of that in this episode, but I mean, there is so much to the psychology of these characters that I think, it's being sort of plotted out as the series is unfolding in almost a real-time estimation. It's not like, we're looking back to the past of events that had already happened and these characters grew up and grew out of it and evolved. This is happening in real time for them. Their real-time uncertainties and frustrations and trying to make sense of their own internal conflict, let alone the conflict of emotions that other people exhibit that they can't, in Satsui's case, he can't detect, he can't read. He hasn't had enough interaction. He's somewhat socially inept. He hasn't had enough social back and forth that he can determine by visual cues. In Iroha's case, like observing her mannerisms and the way she says things and everything like that. It's like an alien, fish out of water scenario for him. And his first and only recourse is to recoil, is to shut himself away, is to run away, like, with his tail between his legs, like a scared little child. And normally he would make Ito a part of that, like go to him for advice. He tries to go to Ito for advice in this episode. And this is just before that divisiveness between them sort of rears its ugly head, because he's been, sort of callous to everyone around him because he's got so much going on internally. He cannot be communicative. He hasn't had that experience before, or at least enough to really fluidly express himself, to let people know what he's thinking, what he's feeling, to read the thoughts and the feelings of others, to even be able to take, like in the case of Iroha, once again, to take her at her word, to understand where she's coming from. And so she kind of laughingly, frustratedly, when he shows up at her house, she's like, I can't even be mad at you anymore. I mean, you're just so adorable with your oafishness. You're not being able to understand where I'm coming from, and you're showing up at my door and giving me potato dumplings. Like, who does that? And she's just kind of like, I love you and I adore you so much. I'm not going to be upset with you. And then he runs up, So all of that awkwardness, again, it's almost as though it's unfolding in real time. This isn't, something we're observing post it's all happening, sort of posthumously to the experience of the youth of these characters. If you put yourself in their place, and especially if you have similar scenarios that had played out in your own youth when you were in school, or if you're in school now and, you have people that you can't get along with. Well, why can't you get along with them? There are people that maybe you don't understand. Well, why don't you understand them? How much of that is because they may be lacking in a communicative back and forth kind of nature, or it may be because of your own reserved qualities. And, I immediately cut back to thinking about when I was in middle school. Middle school was the last time I was in school. I ended up dropping out of high school because my mother had been in failing health, and I got my GED afterward. But there were a lot of times between elementary school and middle school where there were just people I didn't get, I couldn't understand. And I was very much reserved. While I was not outcast, I was a geek, and everything like that, comic book nerd and whatever. And while I never got bullied for that, because it was just beginning to burgeon as, the cool thing or a cool thing, the idea of interacting with girls, the opposite sex that I was so attracted to, reaching puberty and all these kinds of things, it was oh so frustrating, and it was oh so confusing, and it was so hard to make sense of. And that's exactly the feeling I'm left with so much of this series thus far. It's hard to make sense of, but I'm so much older, and even though there are still issues that plague me to this day that are extensions of those things, in youth, when you're in that school environment, and you have this sort of outlook on what that's supposed to be according to everyone else. It's supposed to be the greatest time of your life, and you're supposed to have so much fun and so many friends, and well, that doesn't happen for all of us. Some of us are very lonely. Some of us are just sort of on our own, and we become accustomed to being at arm's length from everyone. We get used to it. We begin to be complacent, and that's where Setsui is. And so he's very much a wallflower trying to find a way to blossom. But so much of that, because of course he is somewhat of a critical thinker, and he's an overthinker, he's got the anxieties and he's got the confusion. He doesn't have enough interaction under his belt. There's so much of it that's an uphill climb for him. So when I react and I say, like when he ran away from Iroha, and he's even reprimanding himself as he's running away. What am I doing? Why am I running away? Why am I turning down this opportunity? That would be my knee-jerk reaction as well. And I would be like, I don't understand why he did that, but he doesn't even understand, because in real time, there's so much confusion and conflict, and he just can't make sense of it. He doesn't understand. And so that almost primps this all up as genius rather than stupidity. And I'm leaning more toward there's a level of genius behind all of this. So yeah, really, really intriguing episode. Some of it upon my initial reactions were like, oh, again with this? Like, I don't understand. What are the motivations going on here? But by the end, there was enough complementary factor in the interactions between Setsui and Ayado, between the reactions with Iroha and Ishino in the hallway, all of the backdrop of the early forging of the friendship between, Ito and Setsui, and then seeing their semi sort of falling out in the here and now, which then came back around again to their reforging their friendship anew. There was really a lot, as I say, to have unpacked in this episode, and it was good characterization wise. It was an enjoyable episode, even though, as I say, at first, this is a series where you have to be empathetic. You have to sort of think about things a little more than just cursorily what is being, depicted on the screen. And if you afford it a little bit of extra thought, you get more mileage out of it. You get more satisfaction out of it, because it's like, oh, that's what it is. And, so yeah, enough of my yakking on this particular one. Until the next one, that'll be pretty much it for me on this. Hope this video finds you well, and I'll catch you all later.